Good evening. I'm Bill Ninke, and tonight I'm going to demonstrate tying what I call a Baetis Thread-Bodied Parachute. And I've chosen this fly for a number of reasons. One is that it really catches fish doing a Baetis hatch. I like to fish both this parachute and a sparkle dun like things like George tied in the Baetis version. Those are my two favorite flies during the Baetis hatch. Second thing is that the reason I've chosen this fly is that it's a generic fly, and that by varying the body color, you can use it to represent different hatches. If you use, in the Baetis, I use a olive thread. You can use an orange thread for sulfur, or you can use a black thread for midges or tricos, but it's basically the same tie. And the third thing is it demonstrates, I use this to demonstrate some features that you can use in tying a whole bunch of dry flies, particularly parachute flies. One is the spread tail. See this is the size 14. If you can see how the tail is spread out, and it's more like a triangle fashion. So this sits right up on the film and doesn't sit down in too much. The second thing is the poly wing. Polypropylene yarn wing. I'm going to show you how to tie that and post it real nicely. And the final thing is the tying in and the tying off of the hackle that we use to parachute. Back in the early 80s, when I first came up with this technique, I was teaching it in some of the fly tying classes, and one of the students came up after the session was over and said, this one simple move was worth the price of the whole course. So for those of you who are staying on tonight in here, I hope that you find that maybe this one move will be very valuable to you. Now I say I'm going to tie it in a 14 just so you can see it, but mostly I tie it to fish in a size 18. Here you can see the two of them by comparison. And you can see why I'm tying in a 14, because you can't hardly see the 18. And this is boxed with lots of Baetis on it. I think I can get up into this camera. You can see this whole section here is filled with them, some with orange wings, some with black wings, all sorts of sizes. Mostly, I say these are 18s through 22s. So let's start. The hook I use is a Tiemco ring eye hook, the 101, and it's the 101, there it is, TMC 101. Okay, the thread is the Danville 6/0 in the darker olive color. The wing is gray poly yarn, I'll talk to that, and the hackle and the tail are Grizzly. I start by attaching the thread right up at the eye of the hook, and by holding the thread out like on an angle like that, you can use it, and it gives you kind of a ramp and allows you to make a very closely packed covering of the hook in a very simple move. Now I'm stopping the thread short of the straight part of the shank. I've got just a little bit left there, and I do this for a reason, because that helps you get the tail in and to spread it. Now for the tail, I'm using this Grizzly fiber, and I'm long fibers from one of the base of the neck. I'll pull off the fibers, keeping them parallel, put them on top of the hook about the length of the straight part of the shank, but extending behind the hook, and tie them off. Now, I've left the aft part of the hook bare, and what that does is you wrap the thread back. It kind of cups those fibers around the shank, sort of like a half cylinder. So if you come forward a little bit and then slip a loop of thread underneath those fibers and pull on them, you can see this. Can you see the spread here? I'm pulling. I got a loop underneath there. So this is the tail, and it's a technique you might want to use on many of your dry fly tails. Okay, for the wing, I use poly yarn, and poly yarn typically comes with 3 strands. You can take out 1 strand. Poly yarn is a continuous filament yarn, and it gets a little tangled when it's made and things. So what you want to do is just pull on it. I'm pulling on each end, and you'll see that sort of the texture seems to change visually, and what it does is it makes a bunch of nicely aligned fibers. I'm going to cut off a short section. This is a single strand, which is appropriate for a size 14 fly. For a size 18 fly, which I say normally I would take half a strand. I bring the thread to the 1/3 point behind the eye and then cross hatch it in like a spinner wing. Okay. Then I can reach up and pull up the fibers here. I don't know if you can see that. And then I'm wrapping around, making a little post, a little cylinder, a thread, up a ways from the base. Once you do that, take a few wraps around the hook shank itself. And then one thing about these vices that, not the true rotary, but this is a rotary with the other thing, if you turn it a little bit like this, you can get it and make further posting wraps around there very easily by turning the vise. Now what I'm going to do is go back here and build up the thread body. I think a number of people will mention that the real mayflies have very thin bodies. In fact, I use no dubbing here on the size 18. If I'm going to tie a 14, normally I would put a little bit of dubbing, but just for demonstration so it's consistent with the 18, I'm not using any dubbing at all. And this represents the thickness of a real mayfly body. If you can see I don't know if you can kind of see underneath there. All right, now I take a hackle. Here's a hint for you. Things are slow. You take your neck and strip a whole bunch of them out and size them, and then you put them in a little box like this so that every time you want to hackle, you don't have to go in there and measure one. So here's my neck that's all pre-sized. So I picked a size 14 hackle, actually just a little bit big 14 hackle. And what I'm going to do is tie that in by bringing the bottom of the stem of the hackle to my far side, so this would be nearer the camera to you, but it's away from me as a right-handed tire. Putting the piece of the shaft right over the eye of the hook, and then I'm tying it down here. So now I've got the hackle facing backwards. I'm going to take one loop of thread behind the wing and another one in front of it. Now here's the hackle tie-down technique that I hope you will remember, because I think it's extremely valuable. Many of the people here that have taken my courses still use it. I know that August does. It's hard to see it even with this bigger fly, so I made a model hook, okay, out of PVC pipe. Okay, you can see it. There it is. I think it's a size 36/0 or something like that. It must not be a Japanese hook because it's not too sharp down here, as you'll notice. And I've used black yarn. Now, whatever happened to my other? Huh? My foot here. That's my other. Okay. So remember, I said you had the thread. You tie down the hackle. The thread is behind the wing. I bring it up one turn in front of the wing. There it is. All right. Wait a minute, I have to tie it down first. There it is. I'm there one turn in front of the wing. I bring the hackle around the post like this, winding up and down till you're happy. Bring the hackle stem across, and then instead of trying to take this thread over the top like this, I leave the thread hanging and bring the hackle underneath it. Then I lift the thread and the hackle simultaneously, pulling the thread towards the back of the shank and the hackle towards the front. So now if you look down, I'm going to twist this a little bit. You've got a crossover point right on top of the hook, and that hackle is tied down. After you've got it tied down once, you can lift up the front of the hackle and go off and finish the fly. So here's the hackle that I've got tied in now. I'm going to do it at my normal tying speed, which is take a number of wraps. I go up a couple just to cover and get a little vertical extent. Then come back down and make wraps underneath the previous wraps. Now I bring it over the top of the hook, behind the thread, under the thread, like this, lift it up, and it's tied down. I pull the fibers back, take a few more wraps. And now I can cut off that, trim off that stub that on hackle pliers. And as a final thing, you can usually maneuver, you can pull this hackle back and take a few more securing wraps, and then do a whip finish by slipping your Mattarelli or things underneath that, like this. And that's it. Now tug on this hackle to smooth it out because you tugged it back. Clip the wing so that it's about the height of the length of the shank, and there it is. A parachute Baetis, very thin body. As I say, you can tie this in various sizes, different colored bodies, and it's just a generic pattern.
You always use the Grizzly?
I always use the Grizzly on most of the patterns, mainly because of some of the underwater studies and things that I did, and seeing some of Ozzy's films, is that the mayfly only has six legs, so it makes sort of dimples in the surface. And the Grizzly kind of simulates those indentations of the legs of the mayfly. And I found that this is much more effective than dun hackle. It just, a pattern, I've tied it with dun tails and dun hackle, and it just doesn't work anywhere near as well as it does with Grizzly. So thank you.